Hello everyone, it's Julia here from Inflorescence Designs. This week's theme is all about books. For today's project, I have made a fun mermaid tote bag, perfect for carrying books to and from wherever you may be going. It has fun 3D scales and a pull string top so the books don't topple out. You can find a list of all the materials needed in the description below, as well as a link to the blog post where you will find the mermaid tote bag pattern and scale template. So let's begin. Begin by printing out the mermaid scale templates found in the printable PDF pattern. Trace the larger scale onto your fabric and cut it out. I like to cut my fabric into strips that are just slightly larger than the template, about 3.5 inches, and then fan fold them to cut out several at a time. Next, you'll want to repeat the steps you just did with your medium weight interfacing using the smaller scale template. If cutting into strips and folding like I did before, cut these strips 3 inches wide. Next, you will need to fuse the medium weight interfacing to the wrong side of your fabric scale. Once that's done, place the fabric scale with the fusible interfacing onto another fabric scale right sides together. Starting on one of the straight sides, sew using a 1/4 inch seam down on that side. Pivot and sew around the curved edge and stop when you reach the other side. Do not sew on the other straight side. Once sewn, turn your scale right side out and press. You will need to make a total of 47 scales. To make the outside of the bag, begin by placing one of your 2.5 inch fabric strips right side up on your workspace. Mark 1/2 inch on the left side. Then arrange 13 scales along the top, starting with the line you marked. Each scale will overlap 1 inch. Once you're done arranging the 13 scales, you will be left with 1/2 inch of fabric with no scales on the opposite side as well. Once you have arranged your 13 scales, layer another 2.5 inch strip on top, right side facing down. Pin in place and sew a 1/4 inch seam all along the top edge. Once sewn, press the fabric strip up. Repeat this same process for the next row of scales. Again, Repeat the same steps of arranging your scales for the third row. The only difference here is you will layer the fabric for the top of the bag instead of a small strip. Sew along the top edge and press again. For this next step, you will need to pin the bottom row of scales out of the way. Once they are out of the way, you will fold the bag in half along the short edge. Pin the side and bottom together. Sew down the side and bottom using a 1/2 inch seam. Next, take your ruler and measure a 1 inch square in the bottom corner on the side of the bag that has both a side and bottom seam. Make sure to measure from the seam lines, not the raw edge. On the opposite side, you will make a 1 inch square starting from the bottom seam, but on the side with no stitching, it will need to be 1.5 inches in. Cut out these squares. On the side with both a bottom and side seam, pinch the corners together and sew across using a 3/8 inch seam. On the other side, place a clip 1/2 inch in on the folded edge. Pinch the box corner together, making sure the clip stays in place. Once you have pinched the corner together, sew across using a 3/8 inch seam. Once the box corners have been sewn, you can turn your bag right side out. The final step for the front of the bag is to add your handles. You will measure 3 inches in on both sides and base the handles on both the front and back. Let's begin the lining assembly. Begin by folding over 1/2 inch on both sides of the fabric you're using for the pull string top. Then top stitch along both sides. Next, you will fold it over along the long edge and press. Stitch along the top edge 1/2 inch away from the fold. Finish the top stitching again by sewing 1 inch away from the last line of stitches, creating a casing for your rope. Next, mark 1/2 inch away from the edge of the bottom half of the lining on the right side. Layer the pull string fabric and the top of the lining, right sides together, raw edges aligned. Sew along the top with a 1/4 inch seam and press the top of the lining up. Continue by adhering your fusible fleece to the wrong side of your lining. Next, fold the lining in half and pin the bottom and sides together. Sew a 1/2 inch seam along the side and bottom edges, but leave about a 4 inch opening on the bottom for turning. To make the box corners, we're going to repeat the process we did for the outer bag piece. Take your ruler and measure a 1 inch square in the bottom corner on the side of the bag that has both a side and bottom seam. Measure from the seam lines. On the opposite side, you will need to mark a 1 inch square starting from the bottom seam but on the side with no stitching, it will need to be 1.5 inches in. Cut out these squares. On the side with a bottom and side seam, pinch the corner together and sew across using a 3/8 inch seam. On the other side, place a clip 1/2 inches in on the folded edge. Pinch the box corner together, making sure the clip stays in place. Sew across with a 3/8 inch seam as well. Once the box corners are sewn, insert the outer bag into the lining. Align the side seams of both the lining and outer bag pieces together. Pin around the top edge and sew a 1/2 inch seam all the way around. Once sewn, pull the bag right side out through the lining. Next, sew the opening in the lining closed and stuff the lining into the bag. You will then top stitch around the top edge. I did this 2 times for a really nice look. Continue by inserting the rope into the casing of the pull closed fabric. Use a safety pin to help you work its way around the casing. Finally, you should have 2 scales left over from earlier. Fold under the raw edges and press. Place the scale over the end of the ropes and top stitch across.